Hey there, this is Seth Wires from Channel 9 coming to you from the beautiful Belgium, the country of Belgium in Mechelen. We're here at Techorama 2016, and I've got a good friend here, Udi Dahan. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well, thank you, Seth. How you doing?
Tell us what you do, my friend.
What do I do?
Yeah, I know. What don't you do?
Well, I started an open source project like 7 years ago called NServiceBus. Turned it into a company 5 years ago. We've been growing crazy ever since. We're now over 50 people. Everybody's remote all over the world. It kind of makes sense if we're going to be promoting distributed architecture as a way of designing systems that we should be a distributed company.
That's kind of cool.
Live what we preach.
Well, that's awesome. So let's start with NServiceBus, because I remember looking at NServiceBus many years ago. But as a refresher, maybe give us a little refresher on it.
Right. So let's start with the basics. First, you got queues.
Right.
Queues are awesome. Everybody's got a queue. Microsoft has like 3 of them.
Yeah.
MSM queue and Windows Server Service Bus and Azure Storage queues, and IBM has their MQ series, and there's RabbitMQ. Everybody's got a queue. The thing is that queues are kind of like the low-level plumbing. It's like you got to have it, but it's not enough by itself.
Sure.
What NServiceBus does is it sits on top of that and makes sure all of the type of development infrastructure that people end up having to create themselves when they use a queuing system, we take care of that sort of glue logic that's there. So it could be as simple as, well, if I'm pulling a message off of a queue, and I'm going to be putting some other messages back onto the queue, I don't want there to be a situation where if my server crashes somewhere in the middle of that, that the first message goes back to the queue, but some of the messages end up escaping, and if I had any database logic in there, then I inserted a record into a database, took the database generated identifier, put that in a message, and now somebody's processing a message about an entity that doesn't exist, really. Right. So we solve, at a high level, those types of consistency problems while sitting on top of pretty much whatever queue you want.
So that's interesting, right? Because it feels like once you're using a queue, you're kind of committing to a certain kind of architecture.
Right.
So tell us how NServiceBus makes that sort of, because it's a hard pill to swallow. Switching from regular object-oriented stuff to queues, you have to go into messaging, it becomes complicated. How does NServiceBus help you with that sort of leap to that new type of architecture?
Right. Well, I'd say that the path that most people go through is they start around the edges. They take things which are naturally asynchronous.
Right.
Like, well, we need to generate a PDF. We need to send an email. So it's the kind of stuff that there's no real built-in response that comes from that. They say, all right, we're going to put queues around that. Doesn't really need to change very much. Then they start looking at, say, the integration that they have between systems that's being done by batch jobs.
Sure.
So all the ETL stuff of grab data from here and munge it and move it over there, also naturally asynchronous. They say, all right, we're going to start tackling that, make that more messaging driven. And then it doesn't have to be a nightly batch. We start getting into the sort of real-time integration, has a good, strong impact on the business.
Sure.
From there, there's this element of, okay, this messaging stuff is really powerful, it's helpful, what else can we do with it? And that's when they start looking at certain business processes and say, well, do we actually have to have all of this thing either succeed or fail in one go?
Right.
I'd say a classical example would be things that in the retail space, people say, well, we check inventory before we go and accept an order.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Right, so they say, well, what if we didn't check inventory right away? What if we accepted it and then we sorted out the inventory problems after? Because it could be that, the second that we're accepting an order that puts us kind of beyond our inventory, 2 seconds later we get a shipment coming in.
Right.
So, why cause that to fail? Let's loosen up the business process a little bit, and then the asynchronous messaging fits into that very nicely. And as more of that happens, the business starts to see, oh, okay, we can actually scale our business processes better. They're even more reliable than they were before because of all the queues and the retries and that kind of stuff. And then that's when there's kind of this sort of aha moment of the, well, let's relook at everything.
Right.
Let's look at all of our business processes. Let's make more things asynchronous. Let's make things more loosely coupled at a business perspective. And that's when really interesting stuff happens. The high end of what NServiceBus enables, and again, it's not the kind of thing that you'd start with on day one of an NServiceBus project, is reporting. Now the thing is, reporting is the kind of thing, it's the least messaging oriented that anybody could think about.
Right.
It's like you've got your SQL Server reporting services and your various component vendors that everybody has the reporting stuff. The interesting thing about reporting is that users end up rerunning the same reports over and over again. In essence, what they're doing is they're looking for a pattern, saying, I want to see the top 10 customers by a certain region broken down. Say, well, why do you keep rerunning that? Because you want to know when the data changes.
Right.
When somebody drops off the list, when there's someone new on the list, we can actually write message-oriented code to listen for every order that comes in, look at time frames, look at certain types of criteria, and we can run that logic in real time instead of users kind of coming in every day and rerunning. And then when we find something that matches the pattern or there's a change to the result set, send an email. So instead of having this type of more historical reporting as a model, organizations move into real-time business intelligence, where all of the reports that used to be built manually are now NServiceBus event-driven type of business intelligence. And in essence, instead of the people coming to the system and saying, give me data, the system is going out to the users and say, you should do something about this, you should do something about that. And it enables a much more reactive and responsive business organization on top of, say, the traditional messaging technology.
And that's interesting, right? Because once you've committed to sort of this messaging type of framework, it enables interesting things, right? Like these event-based sort of notifications of when things are actually different. My challenge is, when do you start to, let's just say you're trying to go to a message-based type architecture with NServiceBus, where do you start to draw the boundaries around, okay, let's slice this up into a message, how do you start to think about that in sort of a good way?
Right, so like I said, it's the kind of thing that most of the time you start small. For the most part, your existing code base is going to be what dictates where you can start introducing messaging. Longer term, you start getting into just proper design practices around differentiating. I think the big thing is differentiating between commands and events.
I see.
Where for the most part, one of the things that I've never really liked about specific categories of queuing technology is that they treat everything as an event, that they say that the API is all about publishing messages. And RabbitMQ, I'd say, is sort of the biggest offender in this. That by saying the only API is publishing, then it doesn't cause people to think well about, is this a command, a do this type of invocation, in which case it really should only be going to one target,
right,
versus is this an event, something that has happened, and then there will be multiple subscribers to it.
Sure.
So I'd say it's those things that NServiceBus tries to promote, to say, no, if it's a command, then this is what it should look like. And then it's going to be routed to one location. If it's an event, then this is what it should look like, and then it will be routed to many locations.
Right.
And then that difference of saying, are you sending a command or are you publishing an event? By having a different API, we guide people towards better usages of the underlying queuing technology. Now, where do you put that in? I'd say that the easiest place when starting to use NServiceBus, just look at the end of a business process and sort of at the final step, say just name of the use case happened.
Yeah.
That's your event. Place order, order placed, or place order happened. Or cancel order, order canceled. And it's just at the end of the use case, just put those things in there. And even if in the first place you're like, I'm not yet sure who'd subscribe to that, you're in essence laying a groundwork of language of events, which can then be used for any number of things. So when the business comes along in 2 months and says, I want this other thing to happen when people cancel an order,
just plug right in.
Then instead of saying, okay, now we need to go into the heart of the business logic in the cancel order flow and to mess around with that, why don't we just create a subscriber to the order canceled event? And it allows us to extend the behavior of our system much more easily than if we just kind of did not have that event-based scene. So the simplest thing for every use case in your system, at the end of it, you publish use case happened events.
So one of the interesting things when I saw NServiceBus, and it was, again, it's been many years, there was a lot of sort of interesting code that you had to write, but I felt like if there was some tooling to help out, it would make it a little bit easier.
Right.
Do you guys do anything with that?
Yeah, so we've tried a bunch of things in that space. I'd say our biggest successes have been around just visualizing how the system works.
I see.
So the element of loose coupling, messaging gives you loose coupling, and everybody says, oh, we want a loosely coupled code base. The problem is when you get one, then all of a sudden there's kind of this, okay, but
where is everything?
Where did everything go?
Yeah,
it's like
where
it
is
used to
everything?
all be over here, and now it's all loosely coupled. So debugging becomes more challenging. So we've built some very nice tooling that allows you to see, for example, for a given flow, for a given message, you can say, well, okay, which events were published, and to actually visualize that into kind of sequence diagram.
I see.
So the fact that you have, to use an overblown term like microservices, now you have 50 microservices that, message from here ended up going to an event, and that went to 3 microservices, and each of those send out some other commands which push out other events. So in NServiceBus, we do all of the tracking of A caused B, caused C, caused D.
I see.
Then we can visualize what the actual flow of the loose coupling ended up being and show that to the developer. Makes it much easier to see what went on. And then we do the other side of things is that we kind of take that and turn that into sort of a static diagram okay, based on everything that happened, these are your publishers, this is what they're publishing, these are the subscribers, and we're able to visualize what is the design as run picture of your system, but to create sort of a static diagram. Those things have worked best for us. The thing that we tried to do was to kind of to take a step beyond that and say, you're going to actually use this type of graphical language to design your system. And I got to say, that ended up being something of a failure because code generation, it works well for 80% of the stuff, and then it just screws up the last 20%. And we worked so hard together with Visual Studio extensibility, and we went down the path of partial classes and all of that awfulness to try to make this vision of you'll actually use a graphical language to design your solution inside Visual Studio. It was just too hard.
Yeah.
I felt like maybe this time we'll be able to do it. I mean, the time before that was software factories. Remember that?
Yeah.
So that thing did not work out so great. But the tooling that we have now, almost everybody who's building a messaging system, and I say, this is what you could look at.
Yeah.
This would be how your system runs. You look at that and say, I would not have believed using Azure Service Bus or storage queues or Windows Server Service Bus or any of that I could have both a loosely coupled code base and have that level of understanding of my system. In essence, it's like the WCF trace.
Right.
That kind of shows you this calls into that. But WCF is synchronous types of calls that it's able to show you. When you go into an asynchronous space, WCF, the trace view doesn't work anymore.
Right.
So this kind of says, we give you all of the visibility and the traceability of traditional request response programming, but in a truly loosely coupled way.
So let's talk a little bit about some successes that you can talk about, obviously, that you've had with NServiceBus and companies using NServiceBus,
right?
Where obviously they've had to make some changes, but once they made these changes, there was some success. Can you talk about that?
I'd say that probably the biggest successes are sort of the ones of scale. It's our system is buckling under the strain of existing load, and then I don't want to say that specifically it's NServiceBus which changes things, but NServiceBus greases the wheels of moving to an asynchronous architecture. And it's that asynchronous architecture that can allow them to take the exact same hardware that they've got and get 10x performance out of it. So, I'd say some of the most prominent customers that we have featured on our website, Dell, for example, Dell Computer, all of the purchasing of computers on their website is going through NServiceBus. A fair number of the big 4 accounting firms that are ultimately using it for a lot of their internal audit and business processes are being done using NServiceBus. Manufacturing type companies that are using it for a lot of their, I don't want to say it's shop floor automation, but it's more shop floor planning and optimization around that. So almost the biggest successes always come from sort of the large scales. Finance, constantly.
Of course, yeah.
That's sort of the biggest area. So really, today, almost every vertical that you can talk about.
Right.
If it's energy, then you got Chesapeake. If you retail, there's the top fashion retailer out of the UK called ASOS, and they're totally built on top of NServiceBus.
So there's a lot of success going on up in there, man.
There's a lot of very big companies that very few of them are willing to actually go and state their name.
Yeah, of course.
Because a big part of it, they're like, we don't want anybody to know that what our secret sauce is from a tech perspective.
So let's talk about this just to finish up. Where can people go to find out more about what NServiceBus can do? Because obviously you mentioned queuing is a foundational element of NServiceBus, but I mean, you don't talk about your software as this is the database I'm using, just like you don't talk about your software, this is the queue we're using. So how can people get started with NServiceBus to learn how you build on top of queues?
Well, I've been blogging about this stuff for 10 years now. It's
yeah, I mean, I remember.
UdiDahan.com, lots and lots of information on there. Obviously, you Google NServiceBus and we'll have a link in the show notes and find a lot of information. We've started a company blog as well, where getting more of our guys that are out there in the field working with customers, telling their story about how it's done. And I'd say there's a lot of information available online. You Bing NServiceBus. I'm sorry.
I'm okay, man, with whatever you use.
Right.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I'd say is that there's a lot of times this tendency of, well, I've already got Azure Storage Queues, I've already got RabbitMQ. It's just maybe a small wrapper library.
Sure.
And that's all I need. Why would I ever need NServiceBus? And it's that kind of content that personally, as a consultant, I don't like to sell this, but the answer that I usually give is, hey, you know what? Look at the samples of just using the technology directly. Where ultimately, would you rather represent your messages, your core business representations as proper DTOs or as strings? Yeah. And if you're a .NET developer, there's a pretty good chance that you see the value in strong typing.
Sure,
you see
absolutely.
the value in that. So I'd say, go play with NServiceBus, try out some of the samples. And if you ever run into any trouble, either hit me up over Twitter, and like I said, we're over 50 people all over the world, so there'll be somebody that can help you out right away.
That's awesome. So not only do they build distributed software that helps you build a distributed system, but they have a distributed sort of architecture when it comes to HR and how you guys work.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. Again, we're here at Techorama in Belgium. This is a beautiful town of Mechelen. Thanks for watching. This is Channel 9. I'm Seth Juarez. We'll see you next time. Take care.